T2 children executed in their church pews. 47,000 Americans gunned down every single year. 320 gun safety bills blocked by politicians who profit from fear. And then, on live television, Karoline Leavitt dared to call it the work of evil forces. That's when Jasmine Crockett rose, and in 37 seconds, she turned America upside down. Will this be the moment the lies finally collapse? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The sirens ripped through the early morning silence, flashing red and blue against the stone walls of Annunciation Catholic Church in Minneapolis. Parents screamed outside, clutching each other as police officers pushed them back from the doors. Inside, beneath the pale glow of stained glass windows, two small bodies lay covered with white sheets, the innocence of childhood erased by the crack of gunfire. Blood stained the marble floor where minutes earlier children had knelt in prayer. The sound of weeping priests echoed through the sanctuary, mixing with the metallic click of camera shutters as reporters swarmed the scene like vultures drawn to tragedy. Within minutes, the nation's political machinery began to grind. Statements rushed onto social media before the victims' names were even confirmed. Politicians scrambled not for solutions, but for narratives. Some whispered gun control, others shouted about faith. But one voice cut through with shocking ferocity. The Conservateur, a glossy conservative lifestyle magazine, posted on Instagram that this was no tragedy of policy or politics, it was a demonic force at work. The post did not stop there. In its second slide, it declared the shooter to be a deranged transgender militant, laying blame not on the weapon, not on America's gun laws, but on identity itself. The post spread like wildfire, 2.4 million views in the first hour, hashtag surging, timelines consumed. Supporters shared it with righteous fury, typing "Amen" and "Protect the children." Opponents recoiled, calling it reckless, dangerous, a grotesque exploitation of fresh blood still drying on church pews. But in that moment, the truth didn't matter. What mattered was speed, volume, the ability to seize a narrative before grief hardened into questions. Cameras outside the church caught parents collapsing in anguish, but on phones across America, the story had already shifted into something else entirely. By noon, the talking heads had lined up their scripts. Commentator Matt Walsh thundered on X, "This is the moment when trans warriors become the most dangerous. They've lost, and now they are desperate." Bo Loudon, friend of Barron Trump, added gasoline. "America doesn't have a gun problem. America has a transgender problem, mental illness disguised as identity." Their words struck like sparks in dry grass, igniting a wildfire of conspiracy and hate. Each post, each clip, each soundbite buried the cries of Minneapolis parents deeper beneath the nose. But then came a twist, one that would rattle the carefully built facade. FBI Director Kash Patel addressed the press. The suspect was legally identified as female, though previously presented as male. The statement blurred the lines that conservatives had drawn so sharply, raising uncomfortable questions. Was the shooter transgender, or was the truth more complicated? The ambiguity didn't matter to those already convinced. The narrative had escaped, and now it had teeth. As night fell, candles flickered at a vigil outside the church, faces lit by grief, prayers whispered for the two children whose names the nation had not yet learned. Above them, the cameras lingered, hungry not for comfort but for conflict, and somewhere in Washington, a single lawmaker watched the footage, fists clenched, eyes burning with fury. Jasmine Crockett knew what was coming. The question that now gripped America was not just who pulled the trigger, but whether this massacre was about guns or about identity. And that was a question she refused to let the wrong people answer. The Conservateur's post hadn't even cooled before Karoline Leavitt grabbed it, stamped her name onto it, and flung it into the digital void. Her caption burned hotter than gasoline. "This is what happens when a nation surrenders to demons disguised as progress. Pray for our children, but never forget who opened the door to this evil." Within minutes, her repost thundered across the MAGA echo chamber, not as one opinion but as scripture. Matt Walsh struck next. His words hit like a bullet. "Trans warriors are the most dangerous now. They've lost. The game is over. Desperation makes them lethal." His tweet racked up 8 million views before breakfast. The comments flooded with flames, crosses, and calls for war. Then came Bo Loudon, the self-proclaimed voice of Barron Trump's America. His words dripped with venom. "No gun problem. America has a trans problem. Label it for what it is. Mental illness." His post went viral on Telegram, echoed in chatrooms where conspiracy turned into conviction, conviction into rage. By noon, Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, stepped onto the stage of officialdom. Her statement wasn't policy, it was a sermon. A 23-year-old self-identified transgender monster targeted the most vulnerable, children praying in church. The killer scrawled for the kids, "Where is your God?" and "Kill Donald Trump" on a Rifle magazine. Each word was designed not to inform, but to scorch. Her voice shook with feigned outrage. Her image streamed across every cable channel, legitimizing the frenzy. The country fractured in real time. Some viewers clutched their rosaries tighter, convinced the devil himself had walked into Minneapolis. Others watched with horror, realizing a tragedy was being hijacked before the blood had even dry. Twitter threads screamed, "Ban trans ideology," while counter-threads shouted, "This is political theater." The algorithms didn't care which side you picked, only that you picked one, and picked loudly. Meanwhile, the parents of the slain children sat in silence, their grief drowned beneath the noise. Their faces never trended, their tears never went viral. What spread instead were flames, anger, blame, division. Across America, conversations curdled. In diners, truck stops, classrooms, people asked each other not "Why did this happen?" but "Who is to blame?" The answer depended on which screen you watched, which voice you followed. Truth had become elastic, stretched and twisted until it snapped into whatever shape power demanded. In Washington, Jasmine Crockett watched the spectacle unfold like a slow-motion car crash. She saw how quickly sorrow had been converted into ammunition, how tragedy had been rewritten into propaganda before the coroner had even finished his work. Her hands trembled not with fear, but with fury. Because she understood what was happening, and she knew the cost. This was no longer about two dead children. It was about a war for America's conscience, fought not with bullets but with lies. And if someone didn't step forward soon, the lies would win. From her office in Washington, Jasmine Crockett sat before 3 glowing screens, each playing a different version of the same nightmare. On one channel, Kristi Noem thundered about monsters in our midst. On another, Karoline Leavitt's words about evil forces were replayed in bold red banners. On her phone, Matt Walsh's viral post surged past 9 million impressions. Jasmine's reflection in the glass was pale, but her eyes burned. She thought of the 2 children in Minneapolis. Their names had not yet reached the public, but she knew their silence already spoke louder than every pundit on television. She imagined their parents, forced to stand in front of cameras while strangers debated whether their kids had died because of guns, God, or gender. It wasn't grief anymore, it was spectacle. And that turned her stomach. Her fingers tightened around a pen until it cracked. This is what they always do, she thought. Take tragedy, strip it of humanity, feed it to the machine. She remembered Uvalde, Buffalo, Nashville. Every time, the bodies weren't even cold before politics drowned the truth. But this time felt different. This wasn't just scapegoating. This was the systematic corruption of a nation's mind. She replayed Leavitt's voice in her head. Pray, but don't forget who opened the door to evil. Jasmine slammed her hand on the desk. Evil, she muttered aloud, her voice shaking with fury. No, Karoline, the only evil here is the cowardice to confront the real problem. Her staff peeked in, hesitant, whispering about strategy, about optics, about the storm waiting in the chamber. Jasmine waved them off. Strategy was useless if the truth had no champion. For years, she had fought small battles in committee rooms and hearings nobody watched. But now, the fight had come to her doorstep, and this time the whole country was watching. She rose from her chair and walked to the window. Outside, the Capitol dome gleamed against the night sky, serene, unbothered, indifferent to the chaos. Within, she felt the weight of 330 million eyes, some begging for courage, others salivating for blood. And somewhere, two families in Minneapolis prayed for their children, while the world turned their grief into hashtags. Jasmine whispered under her breath, "Not this time." Her phone buzzed with yet another alert bell Loudon declaring that transgenderism is a national security threat. Jasmine closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, then exhaled sharp as a blade. The decision was no longer a question. It was survival of truth, of justice, of sanity. She straightened her jacket, gathered the stack of reports she knew the others would ignore, and headed for the chamber. As she walked, she felt the rage sharpening into resolve, the grief hardening into armor. The hallways echoed with her footsteps, each one louder than the last, like a drumbeat before battle. The storm was waiting. Propaganda had already claimed the field, but Jasmine Crockett was about to step into the arena, and the only question left was this: when truth finally collides with propaganda, will America be ready for the explosion? The morning sun barely touched the marble steps of the U.S. Capitol when the chants began to rise. A crowd had already gathered, signs raised high: protect the children, stop the lies, bend the guns. Their voices clashed in waves, the roar of dueling truths colliding beneath the dome. Television trucks lined the streets, satellite dishes pointed skyward, as if the nation itself was listening through metal ears. Inside, the building was no longer a hall of government, it was a battlefield. The House chamber buzzed with electricity. Reporters packed the gallery, cameras locked on the witness tables, every lens hungry for confrontation. The air smelled of sweat, coffee, and fear. Every cough echoed like a drumbeat. The speaker's gavel had not yet struck, but already, the tension was suffocating. MAGA allies sat in their rows like a pack of predators, smirking, whispering, rehearsing the lines they would soon deliver. Their postures screamed arrogance, their eyes promised blood. At the center, the cast of players sharpened their weapons. Kash Patel, the FBI director, leaned forward over his notes. He was the man with the facts, names, documents, timelines, but even he knew facts might not survive this arena. Kristi Noem adjusted her jacket, her smile tight and rehearsed. She was not here to inform, she was here to wound. To her, every tragedy was a sermon, every soundbite a campaign ad. And tonight, the tragedy of Minneapolis was her altar. In the shadows of the chamber, the media amplifiers sharpened their tongues. Matt Walsh scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad, his jaw tight with fury. He had already framed the story online. Trans warriors as the enemy of the nation. Bill Loudon lounged beside him, phone in hand, refreshing his feed, preparing to broadcast every jab, every insult, every moment of chaos to millions. To them, this wasn't governance, it was theater. And every American was a ticket holder. The chamber itself felt alive, breathing tension. Protesters' chants outside bled faintly through the walls, a reminder that the real trial was not of one shooter, but of a nation's sanity. Staffers rushed with papers, senators whispered in corners, microphones crackled as if the air itself resisted what was about to happen. Jasmine Crockett entered silently, her presence turning heads. Her steps echoed like a metronome, steady and defiant. She carried no theatrics, no smirk, only the weight of truth, but everyone in that room knew truth was the most fragile weapon of all. The gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot, and silence consumed the chamber. For a single breath, the battlefield froze, every soldier at their post, every eye locked on the stage. Then the speaker's voice rang out, "This hearing will come to order," and with those words, the war began. The gavel's echo had barely faded when Karoline Leavitt rose from her seat, her heels striking the marble like gunfire. She didn't wait to be recognized, she didn't ask permission. She seized the microphone with the hunger of someone who knew this was her stage, her moment to weaponize grief. Her eyes swept the chamber, cold and fierce, before she unleashed her voice. This wasn't about guns, she spat, each syllable sharpened to cut. This wasn't about policy or politics, this was evil. This was the transgender agenda at work, an agenda that corrupts minds, twists souls, and sends our children into coffins. Gasps rippled through the chamber, some Republicans clapped, instantly, their palms smacking like gunshots. Democrats sat frozen, eyes narrowing, jaws tightening. The audience gallery erupted in whispers, the tension climbing like smoke filling a room. But Karoline didn't pause, she pressed forward, louder, faster, feeding the fire. She rattled off cherry-picked stories, a fight in a high school bathroom, a viral video of a drag queen reading to kids, a fabricated claim about hormone treatments, turning teens violent. She jabbed her finger into the air, her voice cracking with fury. "We told you this was coming. We warned you that the radical left's obsession with identity politics will end in blood. And here we are, too. Children dead on the floor of a church while liberals wring their hands and make excuses." Her words were venom dressed as prophecy. Reporters' pens scratched furiously. Cameras zoomed in tight. Kristi Noem nodded approvingly, as if Karoline were reciting scripture. Matt Walsh leaned back with a smirk, already typing the soundbite that would explode online within minutes. Bo loud-mouthed perfect under his breath, phone in hand, recording every gesture, every snarl. The nose rose. Conservatives pounded their desks in rhythm, cheering her on. Democrats whispered frantically, some shaking their heads, others scribbling notes for the counterattack they knew was coming. But in this moment, the battlefield belonged to Karoline. Her hands sliced the air like blades, her voice climbing with every accusation, until even the microphone seemed to distort under the force of her rage. She ended with a line designed for headlines. This shooter didn't act alone. This shooter carried the spirit of a movement that worships chaos, rejects God, and now has blood on its hands. And every single one of you who defend them, you are complicit. The chamber cracked open with noise, applause, boos, gasps colliding into a roar. The speaker pounded the gavel for order, but order was gone. The air pulsed with raw hostility, as if the walls themselves trembled under the weight of division. In the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett sat motionless, her eyes locked on Karoline, her knuckles white against the desk. She did not shout, she did not flinch, she only stared, silent as a blade still sheathed, because she knew. The louder Karoline screamed, the deadlier her own silence would become. And the only question now was this: when Jasmine finally spoke, would her words cut deep enough to silence the storm? The chamber was already rumbling when Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, her eyes narrowed into daggers, her voice cutting through the noise like broken glass. She didn't just speak, she lunged. "You're a cheap mouthpiece, Crockett," she hissed, jabbing her finger across the aisle. "You don't care about those children in Minneapolis. You don't care about parents grieving. You care about your party. You care about headlines. You are nothing but a fraud." Gasps scattered through the gallery, and the right side of the chamber erupted in laughter and applause. The jeers swelled, echoing off marble walls, feeding Karoline's smirk. She leaned back in her chair, triumphant, as if she had just landed the knockout blow, but Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Slowly, she stood again, her expression carved from steel. She let the noise wash over her, waiting until the chamber began to quiet under the sheer weight of her silence. Then she struck. "No," Jasmine said, her voice rising like a wave. "I don't care about protecting a party, I care about protecting people. I care about the 47,000 Americans who die every year because of gun violence, 47,000 funerals, 47,000 families shattered. And I care about the 320 bills, 320 that your side has blocked, bills that could have saved lives." The chamber detonated into chaos. Democrats pounded their desks, shouting, "Hear her out." Conservatives shouted back, "Lies and shame." The gallery split down the middle, one half cheering, the other spitting fury. Reporters scribbled frantically, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would defy headlines for weeks. Karoline shot up from her seat, face red with rage, shouting over the din. "You hide behind numbers, but you don't feel the pain. You twist statistics while families bury their children. Don't pretend you care about them." Her words, sharp and venomous, sparked another round of cheers from the right. Jasmine leaned into the microphone, her eyes fixed on Karoline. Her voice dropped low, forcing the room to lean in. "Don't you dare lecture me about pain. I sat with mothers in Uvalde. I held fathers' hands in Buffalo. I've heard the sobs of families who sent their children to school and got back a coffin. Don't tell me I don't feel it. I live with it, I carry it, and I will not let you rewrite it into your fairy tale of demons and scapegoats." The chamber froze. For the first time, Karoline's smirk faltered. Her mouth opened, but no words came. The silence pressed heavy, the weight of Jasmine's words sinking into every corner of the room. And in that stillness, one truth became undeniable: this was no longer a debate. It was war, fought not with bullets, but with words. And only one of them had the courage to wield the truth as her weapon. The chamber had just begun to settle when a voice cut through the noise from the gallery, sharp and furious. It was Matt Walsh, standing up with his fist clenched, his voice booming like a judge delivering a sentence. "Trans warriors are desperate and deadly," he bellowed. His words ricocheted across the chamber, bouncing off the walls, amplified instantly by the cameras locked on his face. Gasps erupted, some in shock, others in approval. Reporters snapped photos, like gunfire, the click-click-click rising in tempo as the moment became a headline before it even finished happening. Walsh leaned over the rail, his finger stabbing toward Jasmine like an executioner's blade. They are a danger to every child in America, and you know it. Before the echoes could fade, Bo Loudon sprang up beside him, waving his phone like a torch. "Crockett is protecting monsters," he screamed, his voice rasping with manufactured outrage. He raised his screen to the crowd, showing his tweet already going viral in real time. "America doesn't have a gun problem. It has a trans problem. Crockett wants to hide it." His words, designed for soundbites, detonated like bombs across Twitter feeds. Within seconds, #ProtectOurKids and #CrockettExposed began trending. The chamber fractured in two. MAGA allies roared with approval, fists pumping in the air, some pounding their desks in rhythm with the chants that had erupted outside the building. Democrats tried to shout them down, but their voices were drowned out by the ferocity of the echo chamber. Inside, the scene was no longer a hearing, it was a gladiator pit, with the media amplifiers fueling the crowd, like bloodthirsty fans demanding spectacle. Jasmine Crockett stood her ground, motionless at first, letting the nose crest like a tidal wave. Her eyes scanned the chaos, Walsh red-faced and shaking, Loudon basking in his own theatrics, the MAGA bench cheering like zealots at a rally. She waited until the nose reached its breaking point, until the chamber was choking on its own frenzy. Then she struck, her voice slicing through the bedlam like a lightning bolt. "Your fear-mongering is killing kids, not saving them." The words detonated. Silence fell in jagged bursts, as if the entire chamber had been slapped across the face. Walsh's jaw locked. Loudon lowered his phone, his smirk faltering. Even Kristi Noem, so polished and posed, blinked in surprise. At the sharpness of the blow, Jasmine didn't stop. She stepped closer to the microphone, her eyes blazing. "You talk about danger while shielding the real killers. You spread hysteria while blocking every bill that could save a child's life. You turn funerals into talking points and call that patriotism. That the blood is on your hands, not theirs." The chamber quivered between rage and revelation. Some in the gallery erupted into applause, others shouted back with venom, but the balance had shifted. For a moment, Jasmine's words hung heavier than a lie's, and in that moment, one truth cut through the chaos. The louder the machine of propaganda screamed, the more powerful her single voice became. The only question now: could she keep that power long enough to break it? Outside the Capitol, the protests grew louder, but inside, millions of Americans watched from their screens as if the nation itself had been dragged into the chamber. In a diner in Ohio, a row of truckers sat with arms crossed, their eyes locked on the overhead TV. Forks clinked against plates, forgotten mid-bite. Finally, one muttered, nodding at Karoline's rage. At a church hall in Alabama, seniors huddled around a projector, murmuring amen every time someone shouted "evil forces." Their heads shook solemnly, convinced the country was under attack by something darker than guns. But in a cramped apartment in Minneapolis, just blocks away from the church where the massacre had taken place, a mother clutched her child to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She watched Jasmine rise to speak. The words didn't erase her grief, but they carried a fire she hadn't seen on her screen in years, a fire that sounded like someone finally saying what everyone was too afraid to admit. "One is not a pattern, one is a scapegoat." She whispered the line aloud, as if tasting it, as if clinging to it. College dorm rooms lit up with live streams. Young people crowded around laptops, their voices trembling with anger, some crying, others pounding the table. "She's right," one student gasped. "Why won't they listen?" Twitter threads exploded, TikTok clips of Jasmine's retort, slicing through the nose of Walsh and Loudon's theatrics. For every jeer, there was applause. For every lie, a counter video went viral. The digital battlefield mirrored the chamber chaos, fury, conviction colliding at once. MAGA forums boiled with chants typed in all caps, "Crockett exposed, save the children, demons are real." The echo chamber magnified Karoline's fire into prophecy, twisting her words into memes, gifs, rallying cries. For her supporters, she had already won. For Jasmine's, the fight was only just beginning. The country wasn't debating policy anymore, it was dividing its soul. In real time, one television broadcast at a time, and there she stood sweating beneath the hot lights, her palms gripping the desk, her jaw set. Every camera angle caught it, the tension in her shoulders, the glisten on her brow, the resolve burning in her eyes. She did not look like a politician rehearsing lines. She looked like a soldier refusing to retreat, even as the enemy closed in. Courage was not her weapon, it was her armor. And through the screens, millions could feel it. In Kansas, a retired veteran leaned forward in his recliner, eyes narrowed. "That woman's got guts," he muttered. In Los Angeles, a teenager posted, "If she can stand there and take all that hate, what excuse do I have to stay silent?" Across the country, living rooms, bars, and church halls became extensions of the chamber. Every viewer pulled into the fight, and as the broadcast surged toward its breaking point, one question loomed over the fractured nation like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Would America choose to believe the truth spoken in courage, or surrender to the loudest lie screamed in fear? The chamber had become a powder keg, and Jasmine Crockett lit the fuse with a single motion. She pulled a thick folder from her desk, slammed it down, and spread its contents across the table. Graphs, charts, crime data, each sheet stamped with the seal of the FBI. The camera zoomed in, lenses clicking like rifle bolts. "You want facts?" Jasmine's voice cut through the chaos. "Here are the receipts." She held up a chart, the red line climbing like blood rising in a glass. Since 1999, there have been 200 mass shootings in this country. 200. Her eyes scanned the chamber, daring anyone to look away. 192 of those shooters were men. One was identified as transgender. She slapped the paper down. One is not a pattern. One is a scapegoat. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. MAGA allies shifted in their seats, suddenly less smug. The gallery buzzed, reporters whispering urgently into their recorders. But Jasmine wasn't done. She held up another page, this one thick with numbers. 47,000 Americans die from gun violence. Every year, 61% of those deaths are suicides, ordinary people who couldn't find hope in a nation drowning in weapons. And in the last 5 years, this party, she stabbed her finger toward the Republican side, has blocked 320 bills that could have saved lives. That's not protection, that's complicity. The boos returned, louder. Now, desperate, like animals cornered. But Jasmine pressed forward, her tone sharpening into a blade. "You call it evil forces, you call it demons. But let me tell you what the FBI calls it." She turned to Kash Patel, seated a few feet away, his hand resting on a neat stack of documents. "Director Patel, please confirm for the record, was the shooter in Minneapolis legally identified as female?" Patel leaned into his mic, his voice calm but heavy. "Yes, legal documentation identified the suspect as female. Conservative claims of a transgender militant are not supported by the official record." The room gasped. A collective shudder moved through the gallery. Jasmine seized the moment, her voice cracking like thunder. "There it is. Straight from the FBI. The facts are clear. But facts don't trend. Fear does. Fear sells. Fear elects. And that's what they're peddling here today." The chamber erupted again. Cheers, boos, chants clashing like colliding storms. Karoline Leavitt leapt to her feet, shouting over the nose, her words drowned before they could land. Matt Walsh slammed his fist on the gallery rail, his face crimson. Bo Loudon raised his phone, streaming the Chaos Live 2000s, the comments pouring in faster than he could read them, but none of it could erase what had just been said. Jasmine leaned closer to the microphone, her voice steady, her eyes unblinking. "Data doesn't lie, but fear does, and the question before this chamber, before this nation is simple. Will we choose the truth written in numbers, or surrender to the lies written in blood?" The chamber still echoed with Jasmine's final words when Karoline Leavitt shot to her feet, her chair clattering against the wood with a sharp crack. Her face was flushed crimson, her chest heaving, and when she spoke, it wasn't measured, it was a scream. "Facts mean nothing," she bellowed, her voice tearing through the chamber like shrapnel. "Americans see what's happening with their own eyes. They don't need charts and papers to know their children are in danger." MAGA members roar in approval, fists slamming against desks in thunderous rhythm, their cheers drowning out the gasps from the Democratic side. Karoline jabbed a finger across the aisle, her eyes locked on Jasmine like a predator about to strike. "You sit there, waving statistics, while protecting perverts who prey on our children. You can dress it up as compassion, you can hide it behind numbers, but everyone in this country knows what's happening in their schools, in their churches, in their neighborhoods." The chamber exploded in no's. Cries of shame and traitor filled the air, bouncing from wall to wall. The gallery erupted into chaos, half the crowd clapping wildly, the other half shouting liar. as reporters scribbled furiously, desperate to capture the storm before them. Karoline slammed her palm against the table so hard the microphones rattled. Her voice climbed higher, frenzied, her words tumbling like a flood. Every day, parents fear sending their kids to school because of your so-called tolerance. Every day, children are indoctrinated, poisoned, told that lies are truth and truth is hate. And now, 2 innocent lives are gone and you dare stand here defending the very sickness that took them. She turned to the gallery, her arms thrown wide, as if addressing a rally instead of a hearing. Do not be fooled. This isn't about guns, it's about a cultural war being waged against our families, against our faith, against America itself. And Jasmine Crockett is the face of that war. The MAGA bench erupted, pounding desks, their chants to protect our kids, swelling like a mob outside the gates. Cameras zoomed in on Karoline's contorted face, her eyes gleaming with rage, her hair disheveled as if the force of her words had torn her apart. The chamber wasn't a hearing room anymore, it was an arena, and Karoline was performing for blood. Jasmine sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on Karoline with a calm that cut through the storm like a blade through fog. Her silence was louder than Karoline's screams, her stillness more commanding than the chaos around her. Reporters noticed it. Viewers at home noticed it. Even some Republicans shifted uncomfortably, realizing that rage was all Karoline had left. The pounding continued, echoing like war drums, each strike of the desk meant to drown out the truth that had already been spoken. Karoline leaned forward, spittle flying, her final words trembling with fury. You can hide behind your numbers, Crockett, but the American people know the truth. And no statistic can erase what evil looks like when it walks into a church. The chamber shook with the sound of approval, the frenzy reaching its peak. Yet in that roaring chaos, one image stood apart: Jasmine Crockett, silent, unbroken, her resolve unshaken. And the only question burning across the nation was this: when the screaming stops, whose truth will still be standing? The desks were still trembling from the pounding when Jasmine finally stood. Not fast, not with fire, but with a silence so deliberate that it smothered the frenzy in the chamber. The shouts began to die, the rhythm of fists on wood falter, and the cameras pivoted in unison, their glass eyes trained on her like prey sensing a predator. She did not raise her voice, she didn't need to. Her hands rested lightly on the desk, her posture steady, her gaze locked not on Karoline Leavitt, but on the cameras staring back at her. She was no longer speaking to the chamber. She was speaking to America. They want you to fear a neighbor. They want you to fear a classmate, a teacher. Anyone who looks or loves differently than you. The words were quiet, but each syllable landed like a nail hammered into wood. Because if you're scared of each other, you will never hold them accountable for the blood on their hands. A chill rippled through the room. The gallery froze mid-whisper. Reporters stopped scribbling. Even the most hardened partisans leaned back as if the air itself had shifted. Karoline's face, still, red with fury, twitched with unease. She tried to interrupt, but her words caught in her throat. Jasmine straightened her shoulders, her tone still low, but sharper now, cutting like a surgeon's scalpel. They give you demons to chase, so you won't notice the coffins piling up behind them. They tell you the danger is your trans neighbor, your gay teacher, your immigrant coworker, anyone but the truth. And the truth is this: children are dying because they chose power over responsibility, profit over protection, lies over lads. The chamber was no longer chaotic, it was suffocating in its stillness. Millions at home leaned forward in their living rooms, diners, and church halls. Screens flickered across the nation, showing a woman who looked less like a politician and more like a witness testifying against history itself. Her brow glistened under the hot lights, but her eyes burned, unwavering, alive with the fire of someone who had nothing left to lose, but everything left to fight for. The camera cut to Kristi Noem, lips pressed thin, fingers gripping her pen like a dagger. It cut to Matt Walsh, his smirk gone, his jaw tight, his notes abandoned. Bo Loudon lowered his phone, his stream still rolling but his eyes glued to the floor. Even Karoline, for all her fury, sat back down, her hand trembling as it clutched the edge of the desk. Jasmine leaned into the mic, her final words deliberate, heavy, unavoidable. So ask yourself this: when the noise fades, when the shouting stops, when the tears are too many to count, who really benefits from the corruption of minds? The chamber went silent, the country did too. And for the first time, the war of words felt less like theater and more like a reckoning. The lights of the chamber still burned in her eyes when Jasmine finally stepped into her office, shutting the heavy oak door behind her. Silence at last. She collapsed into the chair, pressing her palms over her face. For the first time all day, the armor cracked, tears slipped between her fingers, silent, uncontrollable, the grief she refused to show the cameras. But she didn't cry only for Minneapolis. She cried for every memory that still lived inside her, memories she could never quite escape. Texas, 1980s. A small town where the air felt heavy with unspoken rules. She remembered being 10 years old, walking with her father to the corner store, when a group of white men spat at their feet and muttered the word trash. She remembered clutching her father's hand, confused and terrified, as he'd whisper, "Keep walking, baby. Don't let them see your fear." But she had seen his fear, even then, buried behind his calm voice. That fear became hers. In middle school, she watched a Latina classmate shoved against a locker, called illegal, by boys whose parents ran the local police. Nobody intervened. The teacher turned away. Jasmine never forgot the look in that girl's eyes, a mixture of shame and rage, the silent scream of someone made invisible. Years later, in college, she marched beside LGBTQ students who risked everything to demand the right to simply exist, and she saw how easily the world turned love into a crime. Every injustice carved itself into her bones, until empathy wasn't a choice, it was a compulsion, a fire that never let her sleep easy. Tonight, that fire consumed her again. She sobbed quietly, shoulders trembling, replaying the faces of Minneapolis parents she had never met but felt she already knew. Two small bodies under white sheets haunted her like ghosts pressing against the door. She whispered to the empty room, "How many more coffins before they stop lying?" She wiped her eyes, straightened her back, and caught her reflection in the glass. The face looking back wasn't the girl from Texas anymore. It was a congresswoman, a fighter, a woman who had turned fear into steel. The tears dry, replaced by the sharp line of her jaw, the unyielding burn in her stare. She reached for her notes, but what she needed wasn't written there. What she needed was already inside her, the promise she had made years ago, when she first stepped into politics. Never let silence bury the truth. A knock came at the door, hurried, whispering that reporters were waiting, that cameras hadn't gone away. Jasmine closed the folder, rose from her chair, and placed her hand on the doorknob. Her voice was low, but steady now. "Let them wait," she murmured. "The fight is just getting started." And as she opened the door once more, stepping back into the inferno of the Capitol, one question clung to her chest like a brand. How many more scars would she have to carry before America finally listened? While Jasmine wiped her tears in silence, Karoline Leavitt sat behind closed doors in a suite just blocks away from the Capitol. The curtains were drawn, the lights dimmed, the air thick with cigar smoke and cheap bourbon. This wasn't a meeting, it was a war council. MAGA operatives circled the table, their laptops open, their phones buzzing with updates from Twitter. Karoline leaned forward, her voice low, her tone ice. "The data won't save them. The facts won't save her. Fear will." Bo Loudon grinned, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were headlines pre-written for tomorrow's blogs, all in block capitals. "Trans shooter epidemic. America's families under siege. Crockett protects predators." He tapped the papers with a smirk. "We don't need evidence, we need emotion. Call it what it is, mental illness. Brand it, repeat it. Make people say it at the dinner table until they believe it." Karoline scanned the pages, her jaw tightening. She knew the cruelty in the words, but cruelty was the point. "We'll call it a sickness," she said flatly. "Not a tragedy. A sickness, and Crockett will be painted as the enabler." At the far end of the room, Matt Walsh was already working his phone, his voice sharp, feeding talking points directly into the earpieces of Fox News producers. "Frame it as survival," he urged. "Parents protecting their kids. Forget Minneapolis, make it about the bitter war. Faith versus corruption, order versus chaos." He looked up, eyes glinting. "They don't need to know the shooter's gender. They just need to believe it's part of a pattern. We give them the pattern." The operatives nodded, typing furiously, cutting clips of Karoline's outbursts in the chamber, splicing them into fiery reels destined for Facebook and YouTube. Within hours, they would flood timelines across the country, reshaping fear into certainty. Karoline sat back, letting the hum of machinery surround her, the sound of propaganda being manufactured In real time. Bo raised his glass. By the time the sun comes up, Crockett's truth will be buried under a mountain of no's, he chuckled, savoring the thought. America doesn't follow facts, America follows fear. Karoline's eyes flickered, just for a moment, with something unspoken hesitation, doubt, maybe even guilt. But she buried it quickly, straightening her back. Then feed them fear until they choke on it, she said coldly. The room erupted in applause, not the applause of honor, but of sharks. Circling blood, the plan was set, the narrative chosen, and the machine ready to roar. Outside, the city of Washington slept uneasily, unaware that tomorrow's headlines had already been written in this smoke-filled room, and as Karoline tightened her grip on the script handed to her, one question lingered like poison in the air: how long can a lie survive when spoken louder than the truth? The next morning, Jasmine sat at her desk, her phone vibrating endlessly with notifications. But it wasn't the nose of pundits or politicians that gripped her attention. It was the unread messages piling into her inbox from Minneapolis. Parents, siblings, teachers, every line was soaked in grief, every word a plea for someone, anyone, to cut through the noise and speak for the dead. One mother wrote, "My son had just learned to tie his shoes. He was so proud. Now I have to choose a coffin instead of a backpack." Another message, from a father who had lost his daughter, simply read, "Tell them she was 7. Make them say her name. Don't let them turn her into a headline about demons." Jasmine's hands trembled as she scrolled, tears streaking her cheeks. She knew what she had to do. That afternoon, the chamber was louder than ever. Karoline Leavitt sat upright, rehearsed and polished, her allies pounding desks, repeating their mantra, "Protect our kids, protect our kids." The noise was a tidal wave meant to drown out everything else. Jasmine waited, clutching the printouts of those messages in her hand. When the speaker finally recognized her, she rose, not with statistics this time, not with fire, but with something heavier. She adjusted the microphone, her voice quiet but unshakable. "I've received letters from the families in Minneapolis. I am going to read their words into this record." The chamber stirred uneasily. Karoline rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath. Walsh smirked from the gallery. But when Jasmine began to read, the room shifted. Her voice quivered as she spoke the mother's words. "My son had just learned to tie his shoes. Now I have to choose a coffin instead of a backpack." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Reporters froze, pens hovering midair. She turned to the second letter, her voice breaking. "Tell them she was 7. Make them say her name. Don't let them turn her into a headline about demons." The chamber went still. Even the MAGA bench stopped pounding, their fists lowering, their eyes darting nervously to the cameras. Karoline shifted in her seat, her lips tightening, but she said nothing. The silence wasn't respectful, it was suffocating. Jasmine lowered the papers, her eyes burning. "This is what's real. Not hashtags, not sound bites, real families, real children. And while you scream about agendas and demons, they are planning funerals." Her voice cracked, but she did not falter. "You cannot argue with their grief, you cannot twist their pain into your politics. Because their words are the truth." No one moved. The roar that had defined every moment of the hearing evaporated, replaced by the stillness of a nation staring into a mirror it didn't want to face. The cameras caught every flicker of discomfort, every bowed head, every tear hidden behind a clenched jaw, and as Jasmine's final words echoed through the chamber, a question heavier than any statistic lingered in the air: would this grief finally pierce the armor of lies, or would even the tears of parents be sacrificed to the machine? The silence after Jasmine's reading was unbearable, stretching like a taut wire ready to snap. And then, with a sudden crash of noise, Karoline Leavitt seized it back. She shot to her feet, her voice erupting like a siren. "This is about demons," she screamed, her arms flailing wide, her face contorted with fury. "This is about protecting children from predators." The MAGA side roared to life, their cheers shaking the chamber like an earthquake. Desks rattled beneath pounding fists. Voices rose in a frenzy. Chants to "protect our kids" thundered through the hall until the floor itself seemed to vibrate. The gallery joined in, some clapping, some shouting, others rising to their feet as if they were at a rally rather than a hearing. Karoline's voice climbed above the din, each word a dagger meant to pierce through the grief Jasmine had laid bare. "They want you to weep. They want you to cry. They want you to believe that we are the problem. But open your eyes. The predators are here, in our schools, in our churches, hiding behind their so-called identities, while our children suffer. She slammed her fist against the desk so hard the microphone screeched. And every time Jasmine Crockett opens her mouth, she protects them. Gasps and cheers tangled in the air. MAGA lawmakers stood, clapping wildly, their faces red with triumph, their chants growing louder. Shame, shame, shame. The energy surged like a tidal wave, drowning out the echoes of grief that had stilled the room only moments before. For a moment, it felt as though Jasmine had been swallowed whole, her con and her truth suffocated beneath the avalanche of no's. Karoline leaned forward, pointing directly at Jasmine with a trembling finger. You want to lecture us about coffins? You want to parade parents' tears as if they're your props? No, Congresswoman, you're not defending families. You're defending an agenda. You're not protecting children. You're protecting demons dressed as teachers, activists, neighbors. Her words cracked and hinged, but the fury in them lit the chamber like fire to gasoline. Reporters scribbled in a frenzy. Cameras zoomed on Karoline's blazing face, on Jasmine's stillness, on the spectacle of a chamber that looked more like a coliseum than a seat of government. Even Kash Patel, still clutching his documents, looked unsettled as the storm reached its peak. For the first time, Jasmine seemed cornered. The nose pressed down on her, a suffocating wall of sound. The crowd was with Karoline now, the fury, contagious, sweeping across the chamber until even those unsure of her words found themselves swept into her fire. The hearing teetered on the edge of collapse, the line between governance and mob rule disappearing with every chant. Karoline raised her arms high, her final scream echoing above it all. This is not about statistics. This is about good versus evil. And evil is standing right there. The chamber convulsed in thunderous applause, the roar deafening, the frenzy absolute. And in that suffocating storm, one question crackled in the air like lightning waiting to strike. Could Jasmine Crockett find her voice again before the mob buried her alive? The roar of Karoline's mob still thundered when Jasmine Crockett shot to her feet. She didn't wait for silence, she seized it. Her palm slammed against the desk with a crack so sharp it cut through the chairs like a gunshot. The chamber flinched, cameras whipped toward her. And then, her voice exploded. Predators, she spat, her eyes blazing. You want to talk about predators? The real predators are sitting right here, those who profit from fear while blocking every single bill that could keep our children alive. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The MAGA bench stilled for a heartbeat, caught off guard, as Jasmine leaned forward, her hand raised like she was delivering a verdict. You scream about demons, but let me show you the real devils dressed in suits, sitting in offices, signing checks. She yanked out a folder and tossed the papers across the table, the sheets scattering like shrapnel. NRA donations, millions poured into your campaigns while children's coffins piled up. Hidden lobbying cash from gun manufacturers who celebrate every time a bill dies on this floor. Campaign bribes disguised as fundraisers, $30,000 a plate to make sure the blood keeps flowing. Her voice trembled with fury, but her words were razor sharp. That's not protection, that's betrayal. And every dollar is soaked in red. The chamber erupted not in boos this time, but in gasps. Reporters leapt from their seats, fingers flying over keyboards, tweets firing into the world before Jasmine even finished her sentence. The MAGA side shouted lies. But their voices cracked under the weight of her evidence. Karoline's face drained of color, her mouth opening, closing, searching for words that wouldn't come. Jasmine raised her voice higher, her finger stabbing the air. You accuse me of defending predators. No, I am exposing them. And they are not hiding in classrooms or church pews. They are hiding behind your podiums, behind your slogans, behind your pockets lined with blood money. The room convulsed with nose cheers, gasps, frantic shouts colliding into chaos. But Jasmine stood taller, her voice rising above it all, steady as a war drum. The truth is here, and it will not be silenced. The only question left is this: how much longer will America let its children die, while its leaders cash the checks? The chamber still quaked from Jasmine's thunder, and she leaned back toward the microphone, her voice no longer fiery, but sharp and cold as steel. The sudden drop in tone made the room lean forward, straining to hear every syllable. You want to talk about demons, she said softly, her eyes sweeping across the chamber. There are no demons in this room. No spirits, no monsters hiding in shadows. She paused, letting the silence stretch until even the reporters froze, pen suspended midair. Then she struck. "There are only politicians who sold their souls and they are sitting right in front of me." The words detonated like a grenade. Gasps ricocheted through the chamber, the gallery erupting in murmurs, the sound of shock rolling through the air like a wave. Some Democrats clapped instinctively before realizing the moment was too heavy for applause. Karoline Leavitt's smirk shattered. Her eyes darted wildly, searching the room for an anchor, her lips trembling but no words coming. The camera caught it all, her paralysis, her unraveling, her defeat etched live into the national record. Jasmine didn't let the silence save her opponent. She stepped closer to the microphone, her jaw clenched, her voice deliberate and deadly. "You've traded children's lives for campaign checks, you've sold safety for slogans, you've bartered the truth for power, and now you scream about demons because you're terrified the people will finally see you for what you are." Her hand rose, pointing across the chamber, not at Karoline alone, but at every lawmaker who had sat complicit. "That is the corruption rotting this nation. That is the predator stalking our children." Reporters leapt from their seats, phones raised, tweets flying faster than lightning. "Crockett destroys Leavitt" trended within seconds, hashtags surging across platforms. The MAGA bench tried to shout her down, but their voices cracked under the weight of what had just been said. The gallery was split wide open, half in uproar, half in awe, all unable to look away. Karoline sank back into her chair, her face pale, her hands clutching the desk as though it might stop her from slipping further into humiliation. She glanced toward her allies, but no rescue came. She was alone, exposed, dismantled under the glare of truth. Jasmine inhaled deeply, her final words hanging in the air like a blade. "So I ask this nation, are we finally ready to see the truth, or will we keep pretending the lies are easier to swallow than justice?" The chamber held its breath, and across America, millions did too. The moment Jasmine's final words left her lips, America erupted. News networks broke into split screens, each framing the night as their own battlefield. On Fox News, anchors repeated Karoline Leavitt's talking points like a hymn, insisting Jasmine was playing politics with grief. On MSNBC, commentators called it the most courageous speech of the year. Clips of Jasmine's line, "There are no demons, only politicians who sold their souls," looping on repeat. CNN cut between both feeds, the split-screen war, a perfect symbol of a nation ripping itself apart. Online, the explosion was instant. Twitter trended with dueling hashtags. Hashtag truth over fear surged alongside hashtag Crockett vs Leavitt, while MAGA diehards pushed hashtag demon agenda. TikTok lit up with remixes of Jasmine slamming her hand on the desk, her words sent to booming music, clips viewed millions of times within hours. On Instagram, the faces of Minneapolis's children appear under Jasmine's quotes, raw grief colliding with raw truth. For every supporter screaming finally, there was another typing traitor. The digital battlefield was no less vicious than the chamber itself, but the most powerful voices came from outside politics. Parents of the slain children stood before microphones, their faces pale, their words trembling but resolute. One mother clutched a photo of her son, her voice breaking. Finally, she whispered, "Someone told the truth." Another father stared straight into the camera, his tone steady despite the tears streaming down his cheeks. "Our kids aren't demons, they're just gone. And we will never forgive anyone who uses their death to sell fear." The clips spread faster than any politician's speech. Overnight, the nation split deeper, yet something undeniable had shifted. The air felt heavier, sharper, as though a veil had been pulled back and millions could no longer unsee what they'd witnessed. And as dawn approached, one question burned hotter than all the hashtags combined: was this the spark that would finally force America to face the truth, or just another fire drowned out by the machine of lies? The streets of Minneapolis were draped in candlelight. Thousands gathered outside Annunciation Catholic Church, their voices hushed, the air heavy with grief. Photographs of two children rested against the church steps, framed by teddy bears and flowers, their smiles frozen in time. Jasmine Crockett walked slowly through the crowd, her hand trembling as parents reached for her, pressing her palms, clutching her arms, holding on to her as if she were the last tether to justice. She embraced a mother whose body shook with sobs. The woman whispered through her tears, "My boy just learned to write his name. Now I'm writing his obituary." Jasmine held her tighter, her own eyes wet, her lips trembling as she whispered back, No parent should ever bury a child because of lies. The words weren't part of a speech, they were raw, torn from the depths of her chest. A montage unfolded across the city. 2 small coffins lowered into the earth, fathers collapsing beside open graves, choirs singing through tears at candlelight. Vigils at a school gymnasium. Classmates scribbled goodbye notes on poster boards, their crayons trembling in tiny hands. In every corner of Minneapolis, grief was not abstract, it was flesh, blood, memory. That evening, Jasmine stepped to the microphone at the vigil, her face illuminated by the glow of thousands of candles. The crowd went silent, waiting. Her voice cracked but did not falter. This isn't just Minneapolis. This isn't just 2 children. This is America. And as long as fear is sold for profit, as long as lies are louder than truth, more families will stand where these parents stand tonight. No lawmaker, no lobbyist, no network pundit has the right to turn funerals into politics. She inhaled sharply, her eyes burning. No parent should bury a child because of lies. The crowd erupted not in cheers, but in weeping applause, a sound of anguish and solidarity colliding into one. And as the candles flickered against the night sky, a question heavier than the grief itself lingered in the air. Would this sorrow finally ignite change, or would it be drowned, once again, by the roar of power? The chamber was empty. The roar of the crowd, the pounding of fists, the clamor of cameras all gone. Only the echo of silence remained, hanging in the air like smoke after a battlefield fire. Jasmine Crockett stood at the center, the lone figure beneath the dome lights, her heels clicking softly against marble as she walked back to the desk where hours earlier the nation had nearly torn itself apart. Her fingers brushed across the microphone, still warm from her last words. She closed her eyes, hearing the ghosts of the chamber, the chants to protect our kids, the gasps when the truth landed, the sobs of parents whose children would never return. For a moment, her shoulders sagged, the exhaustion heavy, the cost unbearable. But then she straightened, her jaw set. This was not defeat. This was testimony. She looked directly into the camera, her gaze unflinching, her voice low but resonant, each word etched into the silence like a verdict. This battle was never about guns versus gender. It was never about demons or agendas or the labels they scream at us to keep us divided. She leaned closer, her eyes burning with defiance. This was about whether truth can survive propaganda, whether courage can survive fear, whether justice can survive corruption. The lens tightened on her face. The chamber lights gleamed against her skin, the weight of her words pressing outward into millions of homes across America. She paused, letting the silence grow sharp, her next words deliberate, final. This was never about guns versus gender. It was about whether America can survive the corruption of minds. Her voice cracked just slightly, but her stare did not waver. And the real question is, will we? The camera held her gaze for a breathless beat. Then the screen cut to black dot. In every moment of chaos, there lies a choice whether to surrender to fear or to stand for truth. This story reminds us that propaganda thrives when silence prevails, but courage can break through even the loudest lies. Jasmine's fight was not just about politics. It was about protecting the dignity of every life against those who profit from division. In our own lives, we face smaller but no less important battles between fear and honesty, apathy and action. The question now is yours. When corruption of minds threatens the truth around you, will you remain silent or will you speak? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.